Today's video is on Super Mario Galaxy 2. And not only that, it's the piece of music that plays in the second level. We'll talk about the first level another time. It's a little bit more complicated, maybe, kinda, sorta. I don't know. This one's short, so there's not that much to talk about, but there's a lot to talk about. I'll explain. So, it starts out with a predominant-dominant chain. This is our nifty little diagram that we've seen a million times, and this diagram tells us a lot of information, but what's important is that it has colors on it, and look at, they correspond to colors here. There's blue, red, and blue, red. That sounds like it's going up and building tension. But he doesn't do that, he only does it twice. And then he resolves. And this is what we call a major predominant-dominant chain. And it's a major predominant-dominant chain because all of the chords in the chain are major. And it's actually slightly more chromatic than other predominant-dominant chains, because if you were going to think of this chain in a major key, then the flat 6, flat 7 would be borrowed. If you're going to think about it in a minor key, then the 4, 5 would be borrowed. But I think that in Japanese style, it doesn't make sense to think about it in any other sense but a minor key. But that's just personal preference, the way that I think about Japanese music. And then it resolves here to this E flat major chord. And then we get that long tonic function sort of introduction, and it's preparing what's going to go on here. I don't know. It's a tonic function, but it prepares the tonic. That's because it's like... Even though it's tonic function, it's not totally resolved because of the added ninth. And then that ends up resolving too. If it's not evident, we have a pedal here. So we have... So that's all the one chord. We have this minor 4 chord, which is nice modal borrowing. And then we have basically a 1, 6, 4, 5 over top of a tonic pedal, which is sort of disguising the 1, 6, 4, 5. So what is a 1, 6, 4, 5? A lot of people have never heard of this chord before. In fact, before I went to school and studied classical music, this did not make any sense to me. So I'm going to explain it a little bit, right? So there's this progression called the gallant cadential formula. And it's used to create a very dramatic cadence. And it has this bass line. 4, 5, 5, 1, bum, bum, bum. And it's supposed to sound like very clean, right? The whole point of it is to sound as clean as possible. As someone who grew up with like jazz music or something, this might be very difficult for you to understand. That there might be someone who wants to create as clean as possible sound. But this is what Mozart was trying to do. You know, this is what Haydn was trying to do. They wanted a clean sound. Like that's 4 voices moving very, very smoothly to create a very clean sound. We call this the gallant cadential formula. And it is so overused in classical music. A lot of people find it to be kind of a faux pas in modern music to use the gallant cadential formula because it's seen as such a cliche. And that's true, I mean, in this instance. I mean, he's covering up the 1-6-4 chord with this tonic pedal. He doesn't want to place it by itself because it's too, you know, it's too easy, right? And so in this gallant cadential formula, we have a 2 chord, which goes to a 1-6-4. And this 1-6-4, what a 1-6-4 is it's a 1 chord, it's a tonic function chord, or it would be a tonic function chord, but it's not really used that way in classical music. Whenever you see a 1-6-4 in classical music, like a second inversion 1 chord, that's what the 6-4 means. It means second inversion. It usually has these 2 notes that move down. Right? We call these suspensions, and these 2 notes move down to a 5 chord. Right now we're on a 5 chord, and then the 5 chord resolves to 1. And it's very clean. But we also have 2 other notes. They're just, I mean, this one goes down an octave, and this one just stays the same. It doesn't even have to go down an octave. They're just common tones. So the only difference between the 1-6-4 and the 5 are those 2 notes moving down. In a way, the 1-6-4 is not really a chord. It's just a 5 chord with 2 like suspensions on it. I know in my other videos I talk about retardations a lot. Retardations are the opposite of a suspension, right? A suspension goes down and a retardation goes up. That's the distinction between a suspension and a retardation. So a lot of classical people don't see the 1-6-4 as like a real chord. They see it as a double suspension of a 5. They're not really seeing it as a tonic function chord. It comes down to not being boring. You don't want to spoil a good moment. And as a result, if you put a tonic function chord here, then the 2 would go to a tonic function chord, and then you could end the piece there, right? It's a tonic function chord, so you can end the piece. You destroyed all your motion. But then after that tonic function chord, you're going to go here, and then back to the 1 chord. But didn't the 1-6-4 spoil the 1 chord at the end? Because you can't have a tonic function chord in the middle if the target of the phrase is a tonic function chord, right? If the target of your phrase is a tonic function chord and you're building up all this tension to get to a tonic function chord, sticky a tonic function chord in the middle of that progression, wouldn't that weaken the impact of it? Wouldn't it destroy the strength and clarity of this 1 chord? Well, a lot of classicists will actually say no, and they'll say that the 1-6-4 is not actually a tonic function chord. It's actually a dominant function chord functioning as 2 suspensions. If that seems overly complicated, realize that the reason why they see it this way is because to them it sounds that way. And you could say, well, you know, to me it doesn't sound that way. I hear as a pretty stable chord. And I think in some contexts, in modern music, the 1-6-4 is used as a tonic function chord. And I do like it used as a tonic function chord. It's like a weak tonic sort of odd harmony. And I don't necessarily buy everything that the classicists say about this chord. I don't think it's as dominant function as they make it out to be. However, I do somewhat agree with them that it has a dominantness to them. And I will buy that in certain circumstances that it does feel dominant function. This is similar, as I was saying, to what we were talking about in previous videos with the double retardation. See, this is the slide progression. And sometimes during that slide progression, composers like to add this double retardation to avoid this. They'll do this. had this double retardation. So you see two notes going up. Da, ma, ba, 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 na, da, na, da, na. Right? That is a lot like our double suspension. It's just cool to compare the two, I think. Moving on, we have a very similar progression to the first time around, but instead we get this bass movement down to flat 6 and then to 5, almost like a Phrygian cadence. In a lament, right? Like in a lament progression, we have that sort of sound. And now I want to talk about another classical principle, right? In classical music, there's a principle that the second cadence should be stronger than the first cadence. But let's look at the cadences here. Now, I don't think that the first or second cadence are really that different from each other, but from a classical perspective, four, 1, 6, 4, 5, 1 or 5, 7, 1 is pretty strong of a cadence. And then he goes, I mean, melodically, we go up higher, but harmonically, this Phrygian cadence is not really stronger than the first cadence. Ironically, I think that doesn't matter. I think this classical principle is sort of missing the point. And this is something that I think needs to be said. Classical music has a lot of good ideas in it, but some of the ideas in it are very outdated. And they also miss the point of a lot of musical things. Like, for example, the first time we go, right? We're just going to listen to the melody. Da 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 ba da 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 da. We're not really going up very high, and then the second time, that's super high, right? We went up way higher, and that was almost like a sweet spot all the way up there. Now, to me, that's more important than what harmony you use in the cadence. See, this is what I think classical people don't understand. They're too bogged down on the actual chords, and they're not thinking about other things like the melody, like the range of the melody, you know, whether it's mostly steps or leaps, because I mean, we have more leaps the second time, and leaps are the equivalent to emotion in music. They're like an emotional outburst, right? And then and there's just some good melody writing here. Dum ba ba na na na. He leaps up and then he steps in the opposite direction. That's very Bach melody writing. And it's very nice. I think that's more important. To illustrate that, I think that the first cadence, rather than thinking about it as this one's weaker and this one's stronger, I don't think that that's the right way to look at it. All of these things are down related. For example, the double suspension, right, the na na, you have those two notes resolving down. Those two notes resolving down, that's kind of downish, right? We have this 5-7 on the 5 chord, right? So on the dominant, we have a 5-7. And then the second time we actually don't have a 5. Usually you'd expect the 7 to be on the second phrase, but in this case it's only on the first one, which is another reason why the first line is actually a stronger cadence than the second statement. But the fa does the 7, even though it makes the cadence stronger, which I guess is classically not what you want because it's the first cadence, but that fa is adding something. It's adding a note that resolves down. So down is really the important thing here. And then the melody walks down. Listen to this. So it's really, it feels like it's heading down. In contrary, the second phrase, there actually isn't a 7. It's cleaner. We have a 2-5 going on here, and a 2-5 over a dominant pedal. I didn't really play it that well last time, but that chord is very bright sounding, right? Dun, da, 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 dun. Da 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 da. The reason why that sounds so bright is that it's a minor 2 chord, and after that minor 4 chord, it feels super bright. And it also has the solfege syllables la going to T. La going to T. Na na, right? Dum ba da ba dum ba da na 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 bum ba na 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 na. This is almost like a double retardation here. 2 notes resolving up. Which makes sense because the first time we had a double suspension and the second time we had a double retardation versus the I mean, contrapuntally it makes sense. We go down the first time and we go up the second time. We also have this bass that goes up. It goes da 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 da, and then it moves on. And the melody also leaps up. As we talked about. So I don't think this classical principle holds up. I think that under scrutiny, I think the most important thing is to have a direction to your cadences. One cadence is doing one thing, your other cadence should do another thing. You should focus on what is the point of your phrase rather than, oh, is this strong enough? Is this weak enough? Right? This is a general rule, and it's one of those rules that's like 70% of the time correct. 80%, maybe even 90% of the time correct. However, the rule is missing the point. Yes, good music does this. Yes, dramatic, very intense music does this a lot, but it's the product of good writing. It's not, in fact, like required for good writing, right? This is one of those weird instances where the rule doesn't work. So don't take all these rules as like gospel, right? Don't take classical rules as gospel. You can take Baroque rules as gospel, but you can't take classical rules as gospel. They were mainly stylistic things of the time. Moving on, we have this recontextualization of the melody, right? Before we had... And now we're going to take that melody, but we're going to do different chords underneath it. If we look at it functionally, like looking at the function chart, it doesn't make any sense. We have tonic function, dominant function, predominant function, which that's a regression back to dominant function. I mean, none of this is making any sense. It has a bunch of regressions in it. It shouldn't work at all, but it does work. And the reason why it works is because this is not a functional progression, it's a lament. And I wrote out exactly what type of lament it is. It's a chromatic lament, but it actually skips a couple positions. And then usually a chromatic lament will go like something like that. But in this case, he's going... He skipped a position. And he likes that probably because he's running out of time and he needs to get going. So he skips to position 3. And on position 3, he does a 5, 7, and 4. And we'll talk about 5, 7, and 4 a little bit more in a second. And then he goes to the 4 chord in first inversion, which is very 5 of 4 typically resolves to 4, and it does here beautifully. And then we get this weird contrapuntal walk down. I kind of think about it as like a flat 6 chord. But we're in a major key, so technically he wants to keep the mi, right? The do, re, mi. The third of the scale, right? The third of the major scale there. So he does like an augmented chord. But I also think he's doing something else as well. And we'll talk about that in a second. So this 5-4-2-4 is a major tonicization. We've talked about tonicizations before on the channel, but just to review, this tonicization, being in third inversion, is kind of a unique one because it contains the entire 1 chord. It's used in like a classical wedge progression. But we don't have a classical wedge here, so I'm not going to explain that. Maybe in another video. But I'm going to say classical wedges are not really used in Japanese style, so it's not really that important. If you want me to talk about classical music, then we could talk about that. But that's not the point. The point is that we have a 5, 7, and 4 here. And then looking at the second line here, this would be even more ridiculous to analyze with function. It just would not make any sense at all. Instead, it's just moving down. It's moving down until we get to the F minor 7, and then the F minor 7 is blue, and then the blue proceeds to the red B flat 7, and then that resolves to the E flat. So I'm going to add on to this diagram. We see that we have dum ba dum ba. When we skip position 2, we go to position 3 with the 5 7 4 to the 4 6, and then we get this weird augmented chord that goes down to position 8. Right, we skip 7. So this augmented chord is really combining positions 5 and 6. And I think the reason why you'd want to combine positions 5 and 6 is because you don't want a 1-6-4 chord. Yeah, but we used a 1-6-4 chord before, but you got to remember, last time we used a 1-6-4 chord, we did it over a tonic pedal. That sort of disguised the 1-6-4. As I said, in Japanese music, you don't want to do the 1-6-4. So in this case, in order to avoid the 1-6-4, he rather do this really weird chord than do a 1-6-4 chord. He'd rather do this than do a normal 1-6-4 because it's just boring. But I'm going to add on this stuff. After he does this 5-4-2, so he moves to this 5-4-2. And then that 5-4-2 is going to move to 1-6-2-5-1. So 1-6-2-5-1 is pretty functional. We got tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic. Next is the B section. The B section begins with a predominant dominant chain like before. Sorta. But it goes back to B flat. If it was a predominant dominant chain, it would have went to D flat, but it didn't go to D flat, it went back to B flat. So he's backtracking. He's not doing the full chain. This is our first example of only using the first 3 chords of a predominant dominant chain. We call this a partial chain. And he does a partial chain by going back to 5. This is one method of doing a partial predominant dominant chain. You can just kind of go backwards and say, well, I don't know if I want to finish this predominant dominant chain. But you do kind of get the same energy because the first 3 chords, right? That third chord is what gives you the energy of the chain. Right, you have to go somewhere with it. So he goes to this other dominant chord instead of the one that he was supposed to go to, because it has to be a dominant chord, right? You can't put anything else after 3 chords in a predominant dominant chain. You have to put a dominant chord there because it gives you so much energy. You need to. That prepares a dominant function harmony. Like you want to hear a dominant function harmony. So he just goes back to 5. And then he goes down here. That ends all the way with the E flat 5 down there. So this section is really interesting because we have the 4-2 progression from the Chrono Trigger video. If you remember, the Chrono Trigger theme goes. The 4-2 progression. And it's very extended. put the double retardation on it. In this case, he doesn't actually do the double retardation, I think. Yeah, he doesn't really do it. But we do see 4-2 moving down to flat 2, which is actually even more like the Chrono Trigger theme. It goes to flat 2. So this is sort of taken straight out of the Chrono Trigger theme, which is kind of cool. But why? I mean, so you did a partial predominant-dominant chain, and then you're going to throw in this random progression from Chrono Trigger, and then you're going to go 4-5-1. If you want like a clever explanation of what's going on here, I don't have one. He just did this. I guess the most clever thing I can say about it is there's no green here. He's only pulling from progressions that are blue and red. And that's because he doesn't want to spoil the big cadence to E flat. Four da 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 da, this really bright 2 chord, na na, this very dark flat 2 chord, da 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 na na. This is a 4 chord, but it's over a tonic pedal. It's a 4-6-4, and then a 5 chord, and then a 1 chord. I think the reason why he has this weird 4-6-4 chord here is because it is a way to avoid a 1-6-4 chord. So this whole time I've been saying in Japanese music, they don't want to have a plain 1-6-4 chord moving to 5. It's really boring. So here's another way to do it. You could just do a 4-6-4 instead of a 1-6-4. That's very tricky. So this flat 2 chord going to 4-6-4 is bizarre. And like you hand this to any person, you say flat 2-9 to 4-6-4, and they're going to go, I don't know. I mean, I hand it to me and I'll go, I don't know. It's just a weird movement. And here it is here. We have a dominant function chord moving to a predominant function chord. So, I mean, it's regressive. Realize what's going on here. Mahito Yokota rather do something regressive than use a 1-6-4 chord by itself. A regression is more permissible than an unaltered cadential 6-4 in Japanese style. To put that into perspective, that means that a chord that's seen as rather benign and common in classical music is so uncommon and so hated in Japanese style that people rather have a chord that completely destroys the motion of the phrase. That's more permissible than doing a 1-6-4 chord, than doing a cadential 6-4. We call it a cadential 6-4 sometimes. You know, a 1-6-4 moving to 5, the like textbook name for that is a cadential 6-4. Yeah, don't do this if you're writing Japanese style music. People will yell at you. They'll say, this is not right. See, Yokota is avoiding it, and you should avoid it when you write Japanese style music. Never use a cadential 6-4. Never use a cadential 6-4. Look at all these instances. We have the... We used a tonic pedal to obscure the 1-6-4. We use an augmented chord and combine 2 lament positions in order to obscure a 1-6-4. another pretty weak chord, a 4-6-4, as a substitute for the 1-6-4. And even though it was regressive, because it's in a weak position, your ear kind of accepts it either way. And as you know, in Japanese style, a lot of times blue-red goes back to blue, which is kind of what happens here. I mean, in classical music, usually you don't want to delay the tonic function chord that much, but I mean, this is modern music, so delaying the tonic is like the whole point of modern music in a way. It's like breaking your expectations of how old music was supposed to be. You should listen to other Japanese music and pay attention to what they do at cadences, because they will never do a 1-6-4 chord. In fact, this was so uncommon that growing up, I never heard a 1-6-4 chord in my entire life. And then I got to school and they said, oh, it's this super common chord. And I was like, name one example of this. Like, give me one example that's not Mozart that this was ever used in. And they named some songs from like the 60s, the 50s. And I'm like, okay, buddy. I definitely grew up with that stuff. The next section is kind of cool. It's all tonic and dominant, and it goes like this. So we have this sort of progression, which is a Phrygian progression. It's 1 to flat 2. This is a very common progression in Japanese game music. It's super common, and there's also a bunch of variants of it. Like, a lot of times they'll use a major one to sound more Middle Eastern or Spanish, like guitar playing. And they also do it backwards. If you play it backwards, it has a very different sound. Versus when you play it forward, it has a more dark, sort of less floaty, more grounded feel to it. And if you start with the flat 2, it's floatier, it's more spiritual. It kind of gets rid of the edge of it. And then we have this sort of functional ending progression. We have this flat 3 chord, which moves to major 4, and then to 5, and then to 1, which is all the way at the beginning of the form where it says A. But this is kind of a cool progression. I call it the disco progression or the marauder progression. It's very similar, if you remember from the Toho video, if you know my channel, then you know that we'd call this a flip-on flat 3. Normally, like the 1, and then that would be 5, go to the 1, but it's only a flip-on flat 3 when it modulates, right? So the difference between a disco progression, like the traditional, like disco music progression, that progression is not modulatory. In a flip-on flat 3, it's a way to modulate, right? So we have... That's really out there. I'm just giving an example of how it can sound. But in that case, it feels like more of a modulatory structural thing. It doesn't have this like cheesy... They feel very different, right? Like the flip-on flat 3 has a very different feel than like the traditional disco progression. And I mean, the Toho composer uses both. So don't let me lead you to believe that like the Toho composer only uses the flip-on flat 3. He uses the disco / Marauder progression as well. Marauder is the guy who really pioneered the progression. He was a studio guy. He was a pretty poor studio guy who used to make bubblegum pop. And then he switched over to making highly erotic dance music. And he became very popular for it, and it turned into disco. Basically, he started disco with Donna Summer. I only learned that from the greatest source ever of a 60-year-old guy who explained to me a disco started. Yeah, I'm not quite that old to have remembered that. And then at the end, we have this really cool chord called a sol dominant. Now, is a sol dominant a dominant function chord or a predominant function chord? The answer is, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Here's two examples of it. Sometimes it's just used like that and then it goes back, right? Dum, ba. And then here. But other times in Japanese music, it often does this. Right? And then you have these two notes that move up, making it sort of like, or sometimes all three of the notes move up. Triple retardation. It's a triple retardation. But there's another variant of it that uses the 2 chord. And you can do... This sounds very like gospel music. The sound is very jazz oriented. But in this case, we are resolving the sol dominant, right? We resolve the sol dominant and then we resolve to our tonic function chord. Sometimes, but you don't have to resolve a sol dominant. It's sort of optional. That's why I put the G chords, like both of the G chords, in parentheses, because you can just avoid them. You can just ignore them. Because the sol dominant is a dominant function chord that has all of the notes of a predominant function chord. It has both. So it doesn't really matter. And in context, there's that sol dominant. No. He does resolve it, but you don't have to. You don't have to go to 5. So that's all for this piece. This was a much longer video than I thought it was going to be. I think I had too much fun with this. That's really it for this piece. I have some stuff in the works. We're getting up there in subscribers. I don't really usually talk about subscribers that much, but we're almost to 1,000, which is kind of crazy. I might have something planned. And I want to say, I did set up a Discord. I'm wondering if people want to join the Discord. But I'm scared because I have no moderator. So I'm going to have to manually look at your answers to the ticket and be like, do I want you here? But if you want to join my Discord, you can. I'll put it in the description. I did spend a lot of time trying to make it. So join my community Discord and donate to my Ko-Fi and buy my charts. Thank you. Good evening. See you in 2 weeks. Oh, and I forgot to mention that I stole this gameplay footage from this YouTube channel.